you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise?
No.
I thought not. It's not a story the Jedi would tell you. It's a Sith legend. Darth Plagueis was a dark lord of the Sith, so powerful and so wise, he could use the Force to influence the midi-chlorians to create life. He had such a knowledge of the dark side, he could even keep the ones he cared about from dying.
See.
Okay. Oh. Anything.
Vince?
Unfortunately, he taught his apprentice everything he knew. Then his apprentice killed him in his sleep. It's ironic. He could save others from death, but not himself.
Is it possible to learn this power?
Not from a Jedi.
Darth Plagueis. Possibly one of the best looks we get into the Sith. How they operate, how they think. It is a perfect representation of what the Sith are supposed to be like. They're ruthless, they're manipulative, they're pure evil. And we see how quickly Plagueis goes from almost a father figure to Palpatine to a heartless master, which is very similar to what happens with Anakin and Sidious. And if you compare that to what we see in The Acolyte, for some reason Disney Star Wars wants to paint the Sith as almost misunderstood, and they want to paint the Jedi as being corrupt and maybe just as bad as the Sith are. That's just not how it is. That's not how it's supposed to be. That's not Star Wars. That is clear misunderstanding the Jedi of the prequel era on the part of Disney and the Disney shills. They spread that kind of idea as well, that the Jedi are some corrupt organization and they were just never good and they were never going to work out. That's even in the sequel trilogy with Luke. It's just pathetic. And on the topic of acolytes, we see multiple representations of what an acolyte of the Sith is actually like. You have Darth Venomous, who was essentially a backup apprentice if Plagueis failed Tenebris. And you also have Darth Maul, who is a future apprentice for when the current apprentice overthrows the master, which is also what Nat Leia was for Venomous. If he had killed Plagueis, he would be the master, and his apprentice would be Nat Leia. And after Plagueis defeated Venomous, he considered taking Nat Leia on as an apprentice before he was killed. And nothing ever comes close to that dynamic in The Acolyte. That's how you know that the people writing these Disney shows don't understand Star Wars. And they want to retcon this amazing novel for the sake of that show, to have Plagueis show up in one random scene. Fuck off. They just don't know how to write Jedi or Sith. The Jedi in that show are just all complete idiots. And in this novel, we see a lot of Jedi, and we never get the sense that they have no clue what the fuck they're doing. Because the people who wrote this actually understand Star Wars and actually have talent, unlike the hacks working for Lucasfilm today. The politics in this novel, as well as the politics in the prequel trilogy, is a big part of why the prequel era is actually interesting and worth exploring. And it's more Disney shill misinformation when they say people hated the prequels because of the politics. That's just not true. Real Star Wars fans don't feel that way. One thing that I really liked in this was how it's explained that the Munes and the banking clan were the ones who introduced the financial credit system that the Republic uses, and that's how someone like Hugo Damask can have so much influence and power over the Senate and how the Republic operates. And something that was really interesting to read was Plagueis' upbringing what he was like as a child, how he was treated by his peers and his family, and how it almost seemed like the only reason he was born was so Tenebrous could have an apprentice. Because after Tenebrous showed up, his mother eventually just abandons him. After the death of his father, he then proceeds to orchestrate the deaths of the rest of his family so he can take over control of the banking clan and acquire all of his father's assets. And something that I really liked about that was how it parallels Palpatine, where he brutally kills his family. He almost uses the Force to beat his father to death. That's kind of how I would describe it. And after that, he basically inherits all of his family's wealth, and that starts his apprenticeship under Plagueis to become a Sith. I do know that this was originally going to be completely from Plagueis' POV. It would have been Palpatine learning about Plagueis' past through Sith holocrons after he murders him. And I'm really glad that they changed it from that to a dual perspective with Palpatine and Plagueis both being POV characters. And we actually get to see the origin of their relationship, as well as Palpatine's training under Plagueis and his progression through the politics of Naboo and the Senate. This book does a lot to really show just how evil Palpatine is, and this novel, coupled with the original trilogy, is why I think he's my favorite Sith Lord in all of the Star Wars canon. Though I have not read the prequel era Darth Maul expanded universe material, so if I do that, it might change my mind about who my favorite is. We'll have to wait and see. But when it comes to Darth Maul, there were some moments that I really liked in this about his character, or the way he crafted his first lightsaber. Originally, it was welding two lightsabers together, but then he was given access to Sith holocrons that had the actual blueprints on how to make those specific double-sided blades, which I think for him were inspired by Zabrak weapons, and that's why he wanted a double-sided lightsaber. But I really like this idea of preserving knowledge of the Sith in holocrons, and that's a great way to have people rediscover the teachings of the Sith, as well as potentially uncovering hidden Sith temples on places like Tatooine, which apparently has a Sith temple, or is rumored to have one. I don't really know how I feel about that, but it's kind of interesting. And something this book goes into is how the Hutts went to Tatooine to set up this pod racing operation, so rich elite people can come and place bets and gamble, and that's how they make a lot of money. And it makes Book of Boba Fett even more stupid. Because if you're not going to use Tatooine to operate some sort of crime syndicate, drug smuggling or something like that, and you're not going to reopen the pod racing to make money, what is there to rule over for Boba Fett? How is he making money? Is he taxing people? He's taxing moisture farmers? Is that how he's making money? This is a very small detail, but Disney will completely overlook it because I don't think it matters, but it adds a lot to the actual universe and these characters. It gives them purpose to do the things that they're doing, but they just gave Boba Fett rule over Tatooine because, well, he's associated with Tatooine. Even though he's just a bounty hunter who was working for Jabba the Hutt, I don't think he would have much of a connection to Tatooine to the point where he wants to live there. It's kind of a shithole, especially when you're not doing anything to earn money. And when it comes to the relationship and dynamic of a master and apprentice and how it's presented in the novel, it does a really good job of highlighting just how the training an apprentice goes through causes a lot of resentment for the master, and it's almost inevitable that they are going to overthrow them and kill them and betray them. That is obviously a byproduct of the rule of two, and it's intentional to keep that rule alive. And the way that the Sith teach each other to harness the dark side is all through negative emotions, which is the main way to do that. I would like to see someone explore the dark side through different means, similar to how the Jedi wield the Force. It's not using positive emotions, it's not using any emotions, they're just wielding the Force. And I think that the closest you could come to that are the witches that we see in the expanded universe wielding the dark side. It is a more pure version of that. They're not using hatred and anger and all these negative emotions. They are just tapping into the dark side of the Force. And I think it would be cool to see more Sith do that and incorporate that into their teachings. And something that really bugs me about Disney Star Wars is the bleeding of kyber crystals to create red lightsabers. I'm not really a fan of that. I've never been a fan of that. I think it's a bit silly. It's pretty unnecessary in my opinion. Like the synthetic kyber crystals, that works just as well, and I don't think think you need this other process with feeding the kyber crystal your hatred and darkness and all that to crack it and bleed it. I understand why that might be kind of interesting, but they don't really expand on that in any interesting way. You know, if you can pour your hatred and your negative emotions and the dark side into an object that is in tune with the Force, then can't they do that with every single thing that is in tune with the Force on some degree? Like other people? Everyone is connected through the Force, so shouldn't a powerful Sith be able to do that to people? Corrupt them with the dark side? Has anything like that happened in Disney Star Wars? I don't think so. The closest you could come to that, I think, is Savage Press in the Clone Wars, where he's sort of empowered with that Night Sister magic. But that is a separate thing from what the Sith are doing with these crystals. When it comes to the Sith grand plan, Bane's grand plan, to take over the Republic, to destroy the Jedi, to rule the galaxy, I like how Plagueis believes himself to be the one to fulfill that grand plan. And a lot like when it comes to Sidious, their downfall is their own hubris. Plagueis believes that he has all the power and all the control over the Republic and over Palpatine. But Palpatine was essentially using him the whole time. It's much like how Palpatine believed himself to be so powerful and have so much control over Vader that he could kill Vader's son in front of him and there's nothing Anakin would have done. But like with how Sidious betrayed Plagueis, Darth Vader betrayed his master, but not for selfish reasons, but because of the love he had for his son. And that connection Anakin has with Luke is something that most Sith, especially Sidious, would never really understand because they're heartless, they're cold-blooded. And we do get to see a lot of that with Palpatine in this. Whether it's murdering his family or having his mentor assassinated. A mentor who actually had a Jedi son who Palpatine later gets killed after befriending that Jedi. And after Plagueis is almost killed in an assassination attempt, Palpatine goes on a murder spree to kill the responsible party, but also a bunch of innocent people who just happen to be there as well, including children. And that's what we want with Sith. We want them to be ruthless, we want them to be evil, because that's what they are. They're not misunderstood by the Jedi like we see in the Acolyte. They're not gonna have a romantic connection with their apprentice like we see with Chimera and Osha. And that absolutely was the intentional takeaway that Leslie Headland wanted people to have about their dynamic. And a lot of Disney shows don't really understand this, but things being drastically different from what has come before it does not magically make it good. Just because something subverts our expectations doesn't mean it was done well. Just take a look at The Last Jedi. It's a complete slop, stupid film. Not just because of how they treated Luke's character, which definitely subverted some expectations, but how they also disrespected the original characters that they created for this trilogy, like Finn. They completely made him into a joke, and that definitely subverted my expectations, because I expected him to be a Jedi. But silly me for thinking that was gonna happen, something actually worth watching. And back to the Acolyte, and how they completely plagiarized Anakin's origin by having Osha and May created through the Force. Even though it's a little different from how Anakin was created, it still undercuts his origin. And of course, it's handled way better in the actual canon of Star Wars, unlike Disney slop. Because in the Acolyte, it doesn't mean anything. It's worthless, and we'll never see a continuation of that ever again, because it was terrible, and no one cared about it. And in this novel, it's not explicitly said, but my interpretation of what has happened and how Anakin was created, it is a result of Plagueis' experiments on midichlorians as well as the progression of the Sith Grand Plan. Multiple times Plagueis and Palpatine experience these feelings of the dark side aiding them, almost supporting their goals. And the way I interpret it is, as a result of that, the Force created Anakin. So he is the chosen one. He is created by the Force specifically to defeat Sidious, to put an end to this Sith Grand Plan, which he accomplishes in Return of the Jedi. And to me, that is fulfillment of the prophecy of the Chosen One. Despite there being other dark side users post original trilogy era in the expanded universe, I still feel like Anakin achieved his purpose, the purpose that the Force created him for. And all of this stuff that we see throughout this novel, the way the Sith are portrayed, how the Jedi are written in the prequels, the original trilogy, and the expanded universe, it is leagues ahead of anything Disney has ever done with Star Wars. And the expanded universe is and always has been the real canon of Star Wars. Disney Star Wars is fake Star Wars. Disney Star Wars fans are fake Star Wars fans. Because no one with talent works at Lucasfilm, they will continue to plagiarize the expanded universe and do a worse version of the stories that we love and adapt characters like Thrawn in the most insulting ways. Because Dave Filoni is a moron, and you can't write a smart character if you're not a smart person. There is no hope for Disney Star Wars, and there never has been. As long as the people currently working at Lucasfilm are behind these Star Wars projects, they're always going to be bad. Jon Favreau is a hack. Dave Filoni is a hack. Some of you are still clinging to this idea that they understand Star Wars, they will make good stories. They haven't, and they won't, and they never will. The best Star Wars material is the original 6 films and the expanded universe, and that's how it's always going to be. Alright, that's the end of that rant. I'm still reading part 2 of The Hand of Thrawn, and that review will go up as soon as I finish reading that book. I'll be taking a bit of a break from EU reviews because The Navigator's Children has just come out, and I want to take my time getting through that because I'm a big fan of that series. But I have created a list of EU material that I do want to cover in the future, and I'll be sure to get through that when the time comes. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe. I'll see you guys later.